and let me extend a very, very warm welcome to any Cornell alums who are attending Cornell Adult University, yes, on campus here today, and any Cornell students attending the summer session who are with us tonight as well. It's my honor and my pleasure tonight to introduce to you Peter John Loewen, the Harold Tanner Dean of Cornell's College of Arts and Sciences and professor in the Department of Government. Dean Loewen came to Cornell last fall from the University of Toronto, where he was director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and the Robert Vipond Distinguished Professor of Democracy in the Department of Political Science. Dean Loewen's research interests include the future of democratic societies and the politics of technological change. He investigates how politicians can make better decisions, how citizens can make better choices, and how governments can address the disruptions caused by technology and harness its opportunities. His topic for tonight's lecture, How Do Americans Think About AI, brings Dean Loewen's transnational expertise and experience to bear on what must be the most disruptive technology of this decade and probably some decades to come, generative artificial intelligence. I know we're all eager to hear about this, but before we get started, let me say a few words about the special fit between Peter Loewen and Cornell, about why it's so important and so right that he became dean of Cornell's largest college at this time in the university's history. One very Cornellian thing about Peter Loewen is that he puts his research commitments into practice. In Canada, he applied his expertise in democratic politics to a range of practical challenges that will be very familiar to those of us in the audience tonight who are American citizens. Setting rules for federal election debates, providing expert counsel on the conduct of elections, redrawing the boundaries of voting districts. In his new role, Dean Loewen is negotiating the now difficult relationship between American democratic politics and the American university. In his own words, at this moment when there's growing skepticism about the public relevance and value of universities, we need to be able to articulate the outsized impact that universities like Cornell have to change lives and impact the world. And putting these words into practice, he'll be teaching a first-year writing seminar this coming fall on the topic, What Does Cornell Owe to the World? For an English professor like me, this is really living your values. So please join me in welcoming Peter Loewen to the podium tonight.
Let me say thank you very, very much to Mary for an introduction that's far too kind, and to all of you for coming here. I've spent a good bit of my career studying what people think about things and trying to understand people's preferences. I don't quite understand the preferences of people who would come to a lecture on a beautiful summer evening like tonight, but I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're at Cornell. I'll just say that for myself, the fourth time I came to Ithaca was when I started my job here last August. My family stayed in Toronto for a little period of time, and I lived in the Statler Hotel, and I worked late every night. And for me, it was pure magic walking across this campus late in the evening as the sun was setting over Cayuga Lake, and it really captured for me the magic of being a student, a first-generation university student going to university for the first time and being reminded of what a wonderful, transformative place universities can be. So for those of you who are just visiting Cornell for the first time as pre-college students, I hope you realize universities really are special places. They will change your lives if you let them, and they'll be a place that you'll have a lifelong relationship with. And for those of you who are back visiting and are a bit older, I hope that you find Cornell as kind of magical as I do. So I want to talk tonight about how people think about artificial intelligence. I'm a scholar of public opinion. I really have spent my career now it's getting close to its third decade, working on measuring people's opinions in surveys. And about 7 years ago, I started working with a colleague at Stanford We were both on leave there, doing surveys of people around the world about how they were thinking about artificial intelligence. And you might think that generative AI is an overnight thing. Actually, we knew a lot of what was going to come was already coming in 2018 when we started this project, but I think the clip at which it's increased is pretty breathtaking. So I'm very interested in thinking about how people think about artificial intelligence, and I'm going to share some intuitions with you tonight. But what I want you to just take away before you read what's on that slide, you don't have to read it, but is that people never think about things in new ways. And especially when we're thinking about abstract things in the economy or thinking about things in politics, people think about things with reference to the way they've already thought about things. And what you're going to see is that the way people are thinking about artificial intelligence in the United States and in other places maps onto a lot of the ways they already think about politics and think about the economy. So what I hope I can leave you with, I think I'll just talk for about 45 minutes, and I'll look forward to any questions that you've got. And I'm going to tape my feet to the floor here so I don't walk away from this microphone. But I want to leave you with sort of five insights about how people are thinking about artificial intelligence generally. I'm going to tell you what those are in a second here. And just before I do that, I'm going to say one thing about what I mean by artificial intelligence. You're going to see here, I'm going to use lots of different examples when we're talking to people about it to get their views on it. And it's not just generative AI, that idea that ChatGPT or other programs like it can produce language or can produce text or can produce video, can do the kind of seemingly creative things that we did before. But it's also things like automated decision making, where you turn over to a machine in an unsupervised way, in a way where you don't tell it exactly what you want, the responsibility of making decisions for you. So there's lots of different applications, and we can talk about different ones, and they vary. Some of them have common traits, others don't. But we're talking about a whole sort of broad set of things here. But here are 5 insights, and I just want to sort of give you evidence of these from my research, and I look forward to talking to you about them. The first is that if you think that there's lots of optimism about artificial intelligence in places like the United States or in Canada or in other parts of the rich democratic world, you have no idea of just how much optimism exists in other places. So the most optimism about artificial intelligence exists outside of this country and outside of countries like this one. And there's important implications for that. We can talk about that. The second is that the way people think about artificial intelligence is similar to how they think about other economic phenomena, and that might not be good. And I'm going to get into politics here and show you how people's views around disruption caused by artificial intelligence and their judgments about whether that's good or bad looks a lot like their judgments about whether things like offshoring jobs is good or bad. The third thing is that, and I do a lot of work in this in an applied way, but also in research, is that when we think about how people want artificial intelligence to be used to improve their lives and to improve public services, there's lots of barriers that are standing in the way of that. The fourth one is that different people think about artificial intelligence differently. Some people have a set of beliefs about artificial intelligence which is pessimistic, where they think it will be substituting of their jobs. Other people are more optimistic, where they think it will be complementing of the work that they do, and other people aren't sure. But those underlying views, those basic beliefs they have about artificial intelligence and the effects it will have on the economy matter for how they want governments to respond to it. And then the fifth one is just is it going to be a data-free claim? And that's that our main problems are not technological, they're sociological. And that will give you a sense of why it's challenging to use artificial intelligence. So essentially what I want to do is just open up my laptop to you to show you results that I've generated in lots of studies with colleagues around the world, some here and some outside of the United States, and hopefully it's enriching for you. Before I do that, I want you just to walk through a scenario with me, okay? So, and the reason why I think about this one is because it wasn't long ago, it was January, I'm Canadian, if you didn't get it from the bio, you get it from my accent. In January of 22, we could travel again, and I had a passport that was pretty full, but it wasn't anywhere near expiration. And I was going through Charles de Gaulle in Paris, and I got up to the station and I handed the guy my passport, and he said, "There's no room in here." And I said, No, there's room. And you're supposed to leave like 3 pages empty, right? I said, "There's room on this page, you go to this corner." And in a very sort of officious French way, he just opened up to the picture page and just stamped the picture, right? So it's over, right? So it's not, if somebody said it's not funny at all. It's the last time I was going to use that passport except to get into Canada on my way back. The problem was At that point in time, it was very hard to get a passport in Canada because they had reduced the number of staff that were working at Service Canada, and there were all these backed up delays, and travel was starting to open up again, so everyone was getting new passports. So anyway, I trudged down to Victoria Street in Toronto, and it took me a little bit of time, but I got my passport. And then I imagine, and I want you to imagine this scenario, imagine instead that in a couple of years, a passport renewal looks like the following. You know your passport's going to be renewed, so you log on to your national country's website and you say, I want to get a new passport, and then you submit some documents, and then at some point you get a ping for an online interview you're going to do with someone. They come on Zoom, you're there, they ask you to show them some documents, you verify all that, you have a nice conversation with you, they ask you, where are you going, why are you traveling, it's just a nice time, and they wish you a great trip, and they say, your passport will be ready for you in 72 hours, and FedEx will deliver it, and turns out all that stuff is true. You had this wonderful interaction with someone and you got your passport pretty promptly. You never had to leave your home. And it was all facilitated by biometrics and all sorts of online security that makes this sort of idea possible. So you get your passport 72 hours later and you open up the envelope and you take it out, and out of it falls a little slip. And that slip is just a notification that says, we do want to disclose to you that the person you were talking to, that person who was so kind and helpful to you, who asked you about your trip and showed interest in you as a person, wasn't a real person. You were talking to an avatar. And we wanted you to know that, just in case you weren't sure about that. For how many people would that make you feel somehow, just in hearing it viscerally, does it make you feel worse about that interaction? By show of hands. How many of you are indifferent to that? You don't care? There's a slight generational difference in the answers. But I just want you to put that example in your mind, or just sort of store it away in your mind until we get to the end of this of our discussion, because I think for me it's demonstrative of a lot of the kind of things we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes. So when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and thinking about the way it's changing the way we're going to interact in economies and do our jobs, there's just some elements of it which are about replacing humans that we feel very uncomfortable about and we're not quite sure why. It's not obvious, right, why you care. Because if this person had been a real person, you're never going to see them again, right? So what's the big deal? But I get it. I wouldn't feel good about it either. Okay, let's set that aside for a second. I have a passport, by the way, and it's still, for now, it still works when I cross the U.S. border. All right, insight number one, AI optimism is lower in richer democratic countries. Last year, in my final year at the University of Toronto, with my colleagues at the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for Science and Technology, we launched a global survey of public attitudes towards artificial intelligence. We surveyed about 1,000 people in 21 different countries across 12 different languages. The countries that we covered combined represent a majority of the world's population, and we ended up with something just shy of 24,000 respondents to our studies. And we asked them all sorts of questions. But among those, we asked some questions about their optimism around artificial intelligence. And I'm going to show you a slide now. And if those of you in the back can read the text, you should either become optometrists or snipers, because I can't read it. But I'm going to tell you what it's showing me here. So this essentially is asking people, which statement comes closer to your view? I think AI will make the future better, or I think AI will make the future worse. And each of those vertical bars shows the distribution of opinion in a country. Okay? And the bigger the gray bar, the larger the share of people saying that artificial intelligence will make life better. And if I read to you the top 7 countries on there and read to you the bottom 5, you'll get a sense of where this is going. The top 5 countries where people have the most optimism about artificial intelligence, among those we sampled, are Kenya, China, India, Mexico, Indonesia, Pakistan, South Africa, Brazil. The bottom set include places like, starting from the 7th from the bottom, Germany, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, Australia, France. And indeed, in every country from Italy down, Italy, Japan, Spain, Poland, Germany, all the way down, the majority of people do not believe that it will make life better. If we ask people, how do you think ChatGPT will affect the future of work? Will it make humans' jobs easier? Will it have no effect on humans' jobs? Will it replace many jobs? Replace are the pink bars. Make humans' jobs easier are the gray bars. What are the countries where people are most likely to say that ChatGPT, I suppose technologies like it, will make jobs easier for humans? Indonesia, China, Japan, Kenya, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. What's the bottom set below the global average? India is down there, but after that, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Australia, the United States. We asked a massive set of questions about people's views about artificial intelligence, and this pattern shows up over and over again, that in the parts of the developing world, there's more positivity about the effects of technology and artificial intelligence on the future and on life now than there is in the rich democratic West. We used examples. I'll give you another set here. This is from later in the survey, so not following immediately. But we also asked people about whether they think that governments should be using, and businesses as well, but governments should be using AI for various things. And just as an example here, I'll let you know that we asked them, do you agree or disagree that AI should be used for the following tasks: determining eligibility and amounts for welfare and Social Security entitlements? This is actually a massive part of what the federal government of the United States does through VA adjudications and Social Security adjudications, right? And there's actually very little evidence that VA judges, for example, when they're looking at the relationship between people's underlying injuries and their disability entitlements as veterans and the amount of benefits they should get, that those things should be related, they're completely uncorrelated. Okay? Computers, AI can do this much better and in a much fairer way than human judges can do it, but people will always go to judges. Okay. So if you ask people, do you agree or disagree that this should be used? The agreement is in the majority in China, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Kenya, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico. And it's basically a split between agree and disagree in countries like Canada, Poland, the United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, and right at the bottom of the tank, the United States. So this is not a criticism. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I don't want you to think I'm passing any normative judgment on whether people gave the right or the wrong answer here. It's called public opinion, not public fact, for a reason, right? But it's just a pattern that you see over and over again, that there's more optimism and enthusiasm for artificial intelligence in parts of the world outside of where we stand or sit right now. Okay. The second insight I want to share with you is that how people think about artificial intelligence looks like their views on similar economic issues. We're going to get a little technical here, but I want to share with you a paper that colleagues and I just published in the American Journal of Political Science. And it's really important for me that I just recognize the colleagues that I do this work with. Beatrice Magistro, who's just starting a new job at Northeastern, actually, next week. Sophie Borwin, who's at University of British Columbia. Mike Alvarez at Caltech, and Bart Bonikowski, my colleague at New York University. And we've been doing a lot of work for the last now more than half decade on these questions. And we wanted to understand how people think about economic change brought about by artificial intelligence. And we wanted to compare it to another phenomenon in the United States, and that is how people think about the offshoring of jobs. I wanted to share with you an interesting fact in my mind, and it's this. A lot of politics in the United States for the last 30 years, economic politics has turned around what? It's turned on the question of, should the United States be, quote unquote, shipping jobs overseas to other countries, right? And there's a wide open political debate on this. I'm not going to tell you what my views are on it, but there's a debate on this, and it's a real debate. The fact of the matter, though, is that most advanced manufacturing job loss in the United States in the 1980s and 90s did not happen because of the offshoring of jobs. It happened because of the automating of jobs in the United States. The jobs didn't go anywhere. They disappeared. Okay, auto plants learned to use robots to do their cutting and their welding and their manufacturing and their window placements rather than having people do them. Some went away, for sure, textiles especially, but most things were in fact automated out. So that's one observation. So what colleagues and I want to understand is, is the way that people think about artificial intelligence displacing jobs the same way they think about offshoring displacing jobs? And what's the implication if it is? Well, the implication, if it is that the same politics that animate debates around offshoring jobs can carry over to the politics of artificial intelligence. Because how we think about things today isn't tabula rasa, right? We think about them in relation to how we thought about things before. So how do we do this? So what we did is we surveyed a few thousand people in Canada and the United States. And what we did is we showed them a whole series of examples or sort of vignettes of economic change through artificial intelligence or through offshoring. What we did is we gave them a little tutorial on how artificial intelligence, generative AI, may change manufacturing, and automation can change it as well. And then what we did is we gave them examples of a firm that's using artificial intelligence or using offshoring to change their process. And we showed them how the effects of that could affect 4 things at once. So if we took at smartphone manufacturing, if you offshore smartphone manufacturing, 4 things can happen. The price of the phone can change. It could go down. It's not going to go up. It's going to go down. It can go down by various magnitudes. The number of customer service jobs that the company has in the manufacturing of this could go up or down, depending on the mix of the product. The number of factory jobs could go up or down, depending on how they're doing it, right? If you're going to a low-wage environment, you may have more jobs, but you're paying less. And the number of computer and data science, kind of high-quality jobs, could go up or down. So we just gave them these hypothetical scenarios. And what we want to understand is which things about these changes do they like or not like. So we show them a scenario. We say, here's the company before and here's the company afterwards. And do you approve of the company making this change? And the only thing we change for people where we change the values of those things, so are things coming cheaper or more factory jobs or less factory jobs, fewer factory jobs, more computer science jobs or fewer computer science jobs in the firm. And then we also change whether it was artificial intelligence doing it or offshoring doing it. And what we find is, you don't have to really read these graphs, but I'll just tell you what they're telling us is, that effectively the same things that make people change their opinions about a firm and the rightness of its decision for offshoring are the same ones that make them change it for artificial intelligence. So if I start at the top, right, what you find is that people, if you look at that graph, what it's telling you is if things are to the right of this line, the change is positively evaluated, and if it's to the left of the line, it's negatively evaluated. And it's just telling you which change we're talking about. The blue dots are for offshoring, and the orange dots, blue dots are for AI change, and the orange dots are for offshoring change. So there's a lot you can learn from this graph, and I'll just tell you a few of what those things are. One is that the patterns look the same, don't they? If you look at the ordering of things and the shape of it, it looks the same whether it's AI or offshoring, but people are generally more supportive of AI adoption than offshoring. AI sits from your view, to the right of offshoring. That's observation 1. The second one is that if you look at which things have the biggest effect on people's opinion, it's loss of factory jobs. People really like the change if it leads to an increase in factory jobs, and they don't like it if it leads to a decrease in factory jobs. They care less about the effects of it on advanced computer science jobs. The other thing, though, that's important is that they do cue their responses on the benefits. So if the price goes down, they like that, right? They think it's a good decision, even if jobs are lost. So people can make these trade-offs themselves. What's most important in this is that it looks the same between the two things, and that suggests to us that there can be a continuation from how people think about offshoring to how they're going to think about big economic changes through artificial intelligence. The second observation is, in the American context, that Democrats and Republicans think about this the same in some ways and different in other ways. The patterns look roughly the same, but I want to make 2 observations for you. One, Republicans are more opposed to either AI or offshoring. Okay? Whatever changes companies are making, they're more likely to say they don't like it compared to Democrats. The second is that they are especially sensitive to job losses. So for our Republican respondents, they really care about those changes in especially job loss and especially job loss in offshoring. And they care about it more than Democrats do. If I was being purely speculative about American politics, and why not, what I would say is that this tells you a lot about that inherent conflict that exists right now in the Republican coalition between whether it's going to be a kind of techno-optimist thing that believes that artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing and automation are going to totally bring back American manufacturing in a really powerful way, or whether actually we should be focusing instead on the massive job loss that could come from it as a result. And there's an internal contradiction in choosing one of those paths over the other, and it's going to be very challenging to sort out the politics of that. I'll just stop there for a second and just sum it up with one point, which is to make sure we're sort of on the same page here, and I think we are. But it is that people clearly aren't coming to artificial intelligence and thinking about it in a brand new way. They're thinking about it the way they think of other economic challenges. Okay, let's shift a little bit to talking about AI in the public service. I've spent a lot of time and done a lot of work with government trying to figure out how we can use artificial intelligence more within public services. And I'll just give you a sense of stuff that we have in our research that suggests why it's difficult for public services and public sectors to adopt lots of artificial intelligence. I'll tell you a bit about the studies that we've done for this without showing you too much of the data, but I'll give you one good example in a second. But the first one is that if we ask people, why should we use artificial intelligence in government, there's a whole various set of reasons people can support it. But those reasons can sometimes be contradictory, and I want to tell you about two different sets of the reasons. One set of reasons has to do with fairness, that people recognize that humans are actually very arbitrary. We've got all sorts of biases, we get tired, we make bad decisions, we're not consistent, et cetera, et cetera. And it's possible to design automated decision systems that don't have those biases or inconsistencies in them. So people will say, well, we can use AI to make decisions about giving out small business loans or allocating welfare benefits or deciding who should get into, imagine this, we don't do this here by the way, but deciding who should get into a university or not, right? Because it will be less arbitrary potentially. So there are fairness reasons to do it, and then there are efficiency reasons to do it. It can just work faster. It doesn't get tired. It can save money. It can detect fraud, right? It turns out a good number of people like fairness reasons, and a good number of people like efficiency reasons, but it's a much smaller conjunction. It's a much smaller subset of people who like both sets of those reasons. So as politicians try to build public consent for the use of artificial intelligence, they have to confront the reality that people have different sets of reasons for why they would support it. And generally speaking, and this comes from a paper we just published in the Journal of Public Policy, data from 14 countries, a pattern shows up over and over again. Those who are more conservative in their orientations and who are more populist, they like the use of automation in government to deal with issues of efficiency, finding fraud, reducing costs, nothing wrong with that stuff. Those who are on the left like using automation and algorithmic government to deal with things like making government more fair, making it more effective. So there's just different sets of reasons. That's obstacle number one. The second one is that there's a remarkably strong status quo bias. So a few years ago, colleagues and I did a couple of studies and we did the following. We described to people three different public policy problems. One was choosing which immigrants should be admitted to a country, if you're using a point system like Canada does. The second was small business loans, and the third was determining whether or not a tax return should be audited. Okay? Still waiting for my American tax return to come back. So those are three different ways, and those have various degrees of automation in them already, but we described the status quo, and then in each of those cases we described what I think we could agree are pretty reasonable improvements to those processes using automation. So we've got 3 improvements across 3 different sectors. We've got 9 different improvements over the status quo, and in every case out of 9, people were less supportive of the improvement than they were over the status quo. People don't like change, right? And they especially don't like change in government. So that's obstacle number 2. The third obstacle is what I'm going to call reputation building, but I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And the third is that when we look, again, globally across a large number of countries, people's populist views, if they're populists, those tend to correlate with more negative views towards artificial intelligence and towards the use of it by government. So there's just a possibility here that there's already a welter of opposition to it. Let me show you this one about reputation building. This is a really interesting obstacle, I think. And I've got a lot of academic stuff here, but let me just give you an example. This is an example which we've done in close to a dozen countries as well. I'll show you the results from Canada, Australia, and the United States. We gave people a scenario where we asked them to imagine the following, and we randomized them to get an administrator or an algorithm. But let me just read this to you, and then you decide what you think the right thing to do is, okay? Imagine a hospital that has an administrator that assigns surgeons to patients. One day, a surgeon is working on a patient in critical condition when 5 more patients arrive at the hospital in need of care. If the administrator decides to reassign the surgeon's current patient will die, but the surgeon will be able to save the 5 new patients. If they do not reassign the surgeon, Then the current patient will live, but the 5 new patients will die. The administrator decides to reassign the surgeon, or the administrator decides not to reassign the surgeon. I'm going to ask you now, just because I can, whether you think if you were the administrator, do you think it's the right thing to reassign to the 5 people or to stay with the one who the surgeon is operating on? And I want you to do it by show of hands here. How many people think the right decision is to stay with this patient who's being operated on currently, by show of hands? How many people think the right decision is to reallocate to the 5? This is a deeply difficult question. This is, for those of you who have done some stuff in moral psychology, this is a version of the trolley question. You'll be familiar with this, right? And what I love about it and what I hate about it is that there's no right answer to it, right? And people, you're all good moral people, and there's disagreement and there's difference in here, right? Okay? What's important here, though, is that when we did this experiment, some people read about this decision being made by an administrator, that is, by a human, and other people read about it being done by an algorithm, by just a computer program that we've written. So the question is, are people going to evaluate the moral decision of a person differently than they evaluate the moral decision of an algorithm? And I'm going to show you that they do in ways that are quite vexing, actually. So there's 3 outcomes that we're interested in when we gave respondents this scenario. One is whether they agreed with the decision. So was it the right decision or not? And you'd think, given how strongly we all feel about this, that whether that decision was made by the surgeon or by an administrator or by an algorithm, that shouldn't affect your agreement with it, right? Okay. The second is whether they would trust the decision maker in the future. And the third is whether they would trust the decision maker conditional on agreement. But I don't know if I'll show you that. Because we use an experiment here where we randomize the decision and the decision maker, we can separate out the effects of the decision maker from the decision. Okay? So here's the results here. So we ask people, do you agree with the decision that was made? And there's a bunch of different features here, right? One is, was the decision maker an algorithm or not? And was the decider utilitarian? And by utilitarian, I mean, if you made the choice, if the decision maker made the choice to switch, that's a utilitarian choice. If they made this decision to stay, we call it an ontological choice, okay? Deontological choice. So here's what we find, right, is that if the decision was utilitarian to switch, people are more likely to have agreed with the decision. So a few more people like the switching decision than the non-switching decision. So that makes people agree with the decision maker if they took the utilitarian choice. But once you control for that, you find that people are much less likely to agree with the decision, knowing what the decision was, if it was made by an algorithm. Isn't this quite strange? Like, look, why is it, you've all considered this problem, why is it that for the people who did our study, that knowing that the decision was made by an AI or by an algorithm rather than by a human makes them less likely to agree with the decision, even when they know the decision? I think it has something to do with people's sense that it wasn't a moral judgment, that they can't imagine that the thing had good reasons. The way that we imagine that people who are humans have good reason for doing something even if we don't agree with it. Right? There must have been a reason why you did that, right? There's other stuff in here, but this doesn't matter quite as much, except, I guess, the note that Americans are just less likely to agree with the decision compared to Canadians. I just think we're a more compliant people, but that's not a matter. And then if we ask folks, how likely are you to trust the decision maker in the future, knowing the decision that it made, right? They become even less likely to say that they're willing to trust the algorithm. The decision that was made, by the way, the nature of the decision, whether it was utilitarian or not, doesn't matter for their evaluations. All that matters in their future trust in this scenario is whether or not the decision was taken by an algorithm or not. This becomes very, very difficult in the context of public services or healthcare services, where it would be desirable in some instances for us to automate decision making when the judgments that we use about people don't apply in the same way to algorithms. And I'm not saying that people's judgments here are wrong or not. I'm just saying that they're different than the judgments that they apply to humans. So how you build up trust in a system where people are willing to engage with it and think that it's on their side and is doing the right thing with public money or with public decisions, it's a very difficult thing to understand how we do that with algorithms versus with humans. And then insight 4. different people think differently about artificial intelligence, and this matters for politics. We did a study just last year, again among Americans and Canadians, and what we did is we told them about various accounts of what generative AI may do for jobs. And we explained to them that some people believe that generative AI will be complementary of the work that they do, and other people believe that it will substitute their jobs. And I had a very nice dinner with Mary before this, and I was telling her how I was using ChatGPT to help create a syllabus for a course. It was like a great research assistant. I could talk back and forth with it. I found it very, very complimentary of my work, right? I don't think, well, really, I'm quite complimentary. What's the proper pronunciation? It complemented the work I was doing. It wasn't complementary to my work, but although it would be nice to have an AI that just told me I was doing a great job. It told me my questions were good, so it was both complimenting and complimenting my work. But we explained to people the different beliefs about what generative AI may do to jobs, whether it will replace them or will complement them. We asked them about a number of other things, about what they think it will do to firms. And the basic underlying story here is that people break into different groups. And in the American case, for example, about 35% of people can be classified as complementers, and that they believe that artificial intelligence will complement the work that they're doing and enhance their capacity to be an effective worker. A slightly larger group, just over 35%, believe that it will substitute their work. And the balance of respondents are either uncertain or they're skeptical that it will do anything. But these groups have really different beliefs. So those who are complementers believe, for example, that generative AI will increase profits for firms, it will increase the quality of goods, it won't have an effect on prices, it won't have a negative effect on hiring or wages, right? Compared to substitutors who believe that it will reduce the demand for labor, it will reduce the quality of goods, it will reduce hiring, and it will reduce wages. So there are just differences between these groups in terms of how they think about these, the effects of artificial intelligence. And it turns out they have very different beliefs as well about what they think government should do to respond to artificial intelligence. So for people who are complementers, they think that the proper policy response to dislocation, for example, through artificial intelligence are things like increasing social spending, reskilling workers, investing in education, a little bit of regulation on AI, right? They don't support regulating on AI. If you look at substitutors, people who think that it's going to take away their jobs, what do they want government to do? They want government to reduce low-skilled immigration, reduce high-skilled immigration, tax artificial intelligence, and regulate artificial intelligence, more than people who are complementers. Now, I'm not saying what the best policy responses are. I can tell you what economists think that they are, and I think that they're right, but I'm not going to tell you what I think they are. But the point is that people who think that artificial intelligence is more likely to substitute out their jobs are more likely to support policies that you can characterize as populist around immigration and around labor. So there's a relationship that's there and relatively strong already in the data between people's underlying latent beliefs about artificial intelligence and what they want politicians to do. And if we look at it just by partisanship, you can see that that Democrats are, these are all in comparison to being a complementer, are less likely to be substituters and they are complementers. And Republicans are more likely to believe that artificial intelligence will substitute for labor than will complement for it. Final observation, and there's no data on this one, this is just an observation, is that the main problems we have or will have with artificial intelligence are not technological, they are sociological. That problem of making a decision in an emergency room, or that unease you may have felt around a passport in an interview being conducted by a person who is, was not real, are not technological problems. They're problems about our relationships with each other, right? That something is happening that is changing what the we is in politics. If politics is about what we do together as people, the introduction of artificial intelligence into the domains of government and the economy and public life change who the we are in really interesting ways and in ways that I don't fully understand, and I think we can imagine about them, but we only see the outlines of them now. But they will disrupt society because they disrupt who the we is. I'll just leave that with you and say thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much. Okay.